Some things hurt us not because they are leaving, but because somewhere inside, we are still desperately asking them to stay.
We hold on to people, memories, promises, and old versions of ourselves, believing that releasing them somehow means everything we shared becomes meaningless. But the tree does not dishonor its leaves by letting them fall. It simply understands that their season together has reached its end. Perhaps we suffer because we confuse loving something with keeping it, forgetting that some beautiful things were only meant to accompany us briefly.
And when their season ends, we often keep negotiating with reality, replaying memories and searching for reasons that might somehow bring yesterday back.
Yet no river moves forward while keeping the same water. Everything it releases becomes part of the journey rather than something it has lost. Maybe your life is asking the same of you, not to erase what happened, but to stop demanding that it continue forever. Letting go does not say, "It meant nothing." It says, "It mattered deeply, but I no longer need to carry it this way."
Because sometimes the greatest respect we can give the past is allowing it to remain beautiful, without forcing it to become our future. Perhaps letting go begins here, when you finally stop asking what could have been and gently make room for what can still become. But making room for something new is difficult when part of us is still standing at an old door, waiting for it to open again.
We return to old conversations in our minds, imagining better words, different endings, and one final. Yet closure does not always arrive as an explanation. Sometimes the closed door itself is the answer we spent too long refusing to accept. And there comes a moment when waiting is no longer loyalty. It becomes the quiet abandonment of the life still waiting ahead. Moving forward does not betray the person you loved or the dream you once believed in. It simply means you are choosing life again.
Some people leave an empty chair inside us, and for a while, every beautiful moment seems to remind us that they are missing.
Healing begins slowly when the empty space stops feeling like evidence of what you lost and becomes gratitude for what once existed. You do not have to forget someone to continue without them. Memory can remain in your heart without becoming the place you live. That may be one of letting go's hardest lessons. You can carry love forward without carrying the pain that once traveled beside it.
Perhaps true healing is not when the memory disappears, but when you can remember without secretly wishing the present would become the past again. And even when the memory stops asking us to return, another attachment often remains. The future we once imagined would happen.
Sometimes we are not grieving what actually existed. We are grieving the life we pictured, the promises we expected, and endings never given.
An unfinished dream can hurt more than a finished story, because imagination keeps building rooms inside a house that reality never completed.
We keep decorating that imaginary future, adding conversations and possibilities, until letting go feels like losing something we never truly possessed.
And this is where acceptance becomes painful but necessary. Some futures must be mourned before another future can finally become visible. There are trains we were certain we would board, destinations we planned for years, and journeys that quietly departed without taking us. Missing one train does not mean the station has become your home. Eventually, another direction will ask you to move again.
But first, you must stop staring down the tracks where something disappeared, because new roads rarely begin in the direction you keep watching.
Letting go sometimes means grieving the future you wanted, then becoming curious about the future that life is still capable of giving you. Perhaps some dreams end not because life has nothing left for us, but because our hands must become empty before receiving something different. But empty hands alone are not enough, because sometimes what keeps us attached is not love anymore. It is the need for an explanation.
We tell ourselves we could finally move forward if they explained why they changed, why they left, or why our love was not enough. So we wait outside emotional doors that may never open, believing someone else holds the key to the peace we desperately need. But closure is not always something another person gives you. Sometimes it begins when you decide their silence will no longer imprison your life.
You may never understand every ending, and strangely, healing begins when understanding everything stops being a condition for allowing yourself to continue.
The ocean never asks every footprint why it appeared. The tide simply comes. Maybe healing asks something similar. Not that every mark be explained, but that we stop tracing the footsteps of what already left. Some questions will follow you forever if you keep feeding them attention. Peace begins when you choose a life larger than unanswered questions. You do not need every missing piece to understand the whole story. Sometimes the ending itself tells you everything necessary for moving forward.
Perhaps closure is simply the moment you stop waiting for someone else to finish the sentence and quietly decide to write your next chapter. And when you begin writing that next chapter, you may discover something difficult. Part of your pain was never about them. It was about you. Because sometimes we are not holding on to another person. We are holding on to the version of ourselves that existed while they were there.
We miss who we were before disappointment changed us, before trust became difficult, before certain memories learned how to hurt.
So letting go can feel like losing yourself, when perhaps you are simply being asked to meet the person you have now become. You cannot return to who you were, but you can become someone softer, wiser, and more honest because of everything you survived.
A forest after the storm never looks exactly as it did before. Some branches are gone, yet new light reaches places once hidden.
Healing does not always restore what was broken. Sometimes it teaches us how to build a meaningful life around what could not be repaired. And eventually the question changes from, how do I become who I was, to who can I become from here?
That question carries no promise of returning to yesterday. Instead, it offers something better. Permission to create a life yesterday could never imagine.
Perhaps letting go is not about finding your old self again. Perhaps it is finally giving your new self permission to begin.
And as your new self begins to emerge, you may notice another weight still remaining. Resentment toward those who caused the wounds you carry.
Anger can feel like justice because holding it seems to honor what happened, as though releasing the pain might excuse the person who caused it.
But forgiveness does not rewrite the past or declare the wound acceptable. It simply refuses to let another person's actions continue controlling your peace. Resentment is a strange burden. We carry the stone hoping someone else will feel its weight, while our own hand grows tired. Letting it fall does not mean the stone never existed. It means you have finally decided your hand deserves to be free. Forgiveness may happen quietly, without reconciliation, without another conversation, and sometimes without the person who hurt you ever knowing you chose it.
Because forgiveness was never a gift you owed them. Sometimes it is simply the permission you finally give yourself to stop suffering. You can remember what happened, protect yourself from its repetition, and still release the hatred that keeps yesterday alive inside today's heart. And with every step forward, their place in your story becomes smaller, while the life waiting beyond that pain becomes larger. Perhaps forgiveness is not saying they deserved another chance. Perhaps it is deciding that you deserve a life no longer shaped by what they did. And when resentment finally loosens its grip, we begin noticing another attachment hiding beneath it, the need to be understood by everyone we leave behind.
We want them to understand why we changed, why we stepped away, why returning to the old relationship no longer feels possible. But some people can only understand the version of you that benefited them. Your growth may feel like betrayal to those comfortable with your silence.
And this is another form of letting go. Accepting that becoming healthier may require being misunderstood by people who preferred the older you. You do not need everyone's agreement to choose peace. Sometimes the life that saves you will make absolutely no sense to someone else.
Two roads can separate without either becoming evil. Sometimes people simply reach a place where continuing together would require one of them to disappear. Love does not always require staying. Sometimes loving yourself means recognizing when remaining somewhere demands a price your spirit should no longer pay. Leaving can hurt and still be right. Missing someone does not automatically mean they belong in the life you are building now. That is maturity, allowing two truths to exist together. You can care deeply about someone and still know you must continue without them.
Perhaps letting go becomes easier when you understand that love and distance are not always opposites. Sometimes distance is how love finally stops becoming pain.
And when distance finally stops feeling like punishment, something changes within us. We begin understanding that letting go was never about becoming empty.
It was about creating space to breathe differently, to hear yourself again, and to discover what remained beneath everything you lost. New growth rarely announces itself loudly. Often it begins quietly.
At first, you may not recognize healing because it does not feel dramatic. It simply feels like thinking about yesterday a little less.
Then one morning you wake and realize you did not check, did not wonder, did not replay the conversation, and somehow you survived.
That ordinary moment may be the beginning of freedom, when what once occupied your entire heart becomes only one quiet room inside it. You realize your story contains more than the person who left, more than the mistake you made, more than the dream that ended.
There are still mornings you have not seen, people you have not met, laughter you have not heard, and versions of yourself waiting ahead.
And suddenly letting go no longer feels like walking away from your life. It feels like finally walking toward the part still waiting for you. Perhaps the space left behind was never meant to remain empty. Perhaps life was quietly clearing a place for who you are becoming.
And when that new space finally opens within you, the past does not disappear. It simply stops demanding that your whole life belong to it.
You can look back without wanting to return, remember without reopening the wound, and appreciate what happened without asking it to happen again. That is when memory becomes gentle, when it no longer asks for another ending, another explanation, or another chance to change what happened. Some chapters deserve gratitude, not continuation. They gave what they could, taught what they needed, and ended where their place in your journey ended.
You do not need to hate what you leave behind. Sometimes the deepest letting go happens when you can simply whisper, "Thank you and goodbye."
Because freedom does not always arrive when circumstances change. Sometimes it arrives when your heart finally stops arguing with what has already changed.
And then you understand, letting go was never about losing them. It was about refusing to lose yourself while trying to keep them.
Whatever left your life may always remain part of your story, but no single chapter deserves the power to become the entire book.
So honor what was, accept what is, and remain open to what comes next. Your heart was made for more than holding yesterday. Perhaps letting go is not the moment you stop loving what was. It is the moment you finally love your remaining life enough to continue.